Hi, everybody. Matt Johnson here. Just going to give everyone just a couple minutes to join, and then we'll go ahead and get started. I think we'll give folks just one more minute, and then we will go ahead and get started. Okay, I think we'll get started. So I'm sharing my screen right now. If for some reason you can't see, certainly please let me know. But we should be good in that regard. And just kind of want to reintroduce ourselves, if you will. So in Vital Records Control, so our company, the FileBound team lives in the VitalECM division, if you will. And our sales rep today is Jim Mountain, and his email is listed over there on the side in case you ever need to get a hold of him. As well as our support team is listed below, Aeneas, Ben, Kyle, myself, Scott, and Stacy. And you can always get a hold of us direct, or ideally it'd be that FB support at vitalecm.com. And that way we can kind of get back to you hopefully as soon as possible in that regard. Welcome to another, again, software education series. And today we're going to be focusing on the FileBound capture software. For a lot of, I think everybody on the call, in fact, I did send an additional invite to the PSI capture session, which is June 23rd and 24th. It's going to be a two-part session. PSI capture is kind of the next evolution of what you would see in a product, from FileBound capture. It does a little bit more of the automation side of things. So if you're interested in that, maybe it wouldn't have to be your whole team, for example, but maybe if you wanted one person to hop on and join that, you certainly can. Again, that's June 23rd and 24th. Those sessions will be recorded as well. So we'll get you links to that too, just in case that time doesn't work out for you. And really, our focus is today is truly that FileBound capture. So, appreciate everyone joining the call. And I really want to kind of cover tips and tricks that we've really learned ultimately from you guys and how to process invoices, inside of the FileBound capture software. And as far as that goes, a few couple other things I want to talk about, or just a brief introduction or reminder of who we are. We're a premier FileBound reseller. We provide the installation, training, and support. Really a lot of services we provide, but including the document conversion, document storage, and shredding type of services. We've got well over 300 FileBound installs, coast to coast, and definitely throughout Canada. And truly, document and electronic content management is kind of our focus in that regard. FileBound itself as a product is a division of Upland Software. They're based out of Austin, Texas. They've been around for 24 years, and their support and development is actually based out of Lincoln, Nebraska. So they're the global distribution of that particular product, if you will, and then they sell it through value-added resellers like ourselves. And a lot of our customers that utilize FileBound today the reason that they've kind of stuck with it, the reason we've kind of kept selling it, if you will, is because of the customizable workflows and forms. And then also the ability for our system to integrate with any system outside, right out of the box ultimately, right? And so FileBound is built for integration. If your accounting system is, then we can integrate with it. Awesome. If it's not, then once they're ready to integrate, we'll already be ready to integrate and ready for them. And just kind of a footprint of our customer base across the United States, just rooftops, if you will, for lack of a better way of saying it, that are using FileBound today. And one of the things that to kind of keep in mind as we're going through the presentation today is really that AP processing lifecycle, that invoice lifecycle, if you will. So today, maybe prior to FileBound, the old way would have been entering the invoice data into the accounting system sometimes towards the end of the month. And now, ultimately, when the invoice comes in from the vendor, we're trying to collect that data, and with the hopes that your accounting system lets us port the data from FileBound into the accounting system. And that's ultimately the goal there. And if we can do that by taking advantage of OCR and automation, then today we'll talk about how to leverage templates and knowing your numbers and all those types of things. All right, so let's take a look. So I'm going to open up FileBound Capture first, and I know not everyone on the call maybe uses FileBound Capture on a day-to-day basis, or maybe they're newer employees to your company. So I'm going to first do kind of a quick walkthrough, and then we'll kind of break it down and walk slowly through the whole entire process. All right, so if I'm in Capture, at the top here, we kind of work left to right. So we first kind of select our project, which we've already got our AP invoices selected, so that's great. And then we can either scan if we've got a scanner on our desk, or we can import, which is probably what 95% of you are doing. So you can come in here, kind of highlight some invoices, if you will, import those into Capture. And then once that those invoices are imported, then you'll see what happens is it kind of runs an OCR engine against it. And when it does that, basically what's happening is it's taking the words on the page that are typed and turn it into usable data. So for example, the old way, I could certainly have typed in my invoice number if I wanted to. With that OCR data, at a very bare minimum, I can simply hover my mouse over that invoice number and left click on it and then have it auto-populate my field over there. And what's nice is once I've selected that field, I can then go to the next field, so on and so forth. So because that OCR is consistent enough, on the invoice, what we can do is kind of take that to the next level and use what's called a template. And what a template does is it understands that, okay, this is creator distributing. So we create the template to tell it, hey, the invoice number is going to be found here, the date's here, the amount's here, the PO number is down here, those types of things. And so once I've got my batch into Capture, I can come to my OCR menu, click Perform Templating, and then that will run that OCR engine and try to match the templates up to that invoice data, and then grab the data kind of as you see on the left-hand side here. And that ultimately is the idea of Capture, is we're trying to grab as much data as we can, if you will, and then kind of leave it up to you to double check it to make sure that it's good. So if you think of that concept, prior to a FileBound process, you might have keyed the data into the accounting system, and as you're keying it in, that you're kind of double checking it as you go. When we implement the OCR process, the idea is that let the OCR grab whatever data that it can off of those invoices, but we still kind of want you to double check it, because our ultimate goal is to port this data into the accounting system. And so obviously we want it correct, as it goes into FileBound to make, get the most time savings from that whole process there. So that's kind of just a couple of pointers I like to mention out, and really, honestly, if I say pointers that you guys have taught me, which has been great. And so, from here, then I could simply click the upload button, and then that would upload these invoices into FileBound, once I'm kind of done double checking all my fields. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start that over and then break it down kind of step by step. So let me delete that batch. I'm going to close out of Capture. And one of the things that that you have on your end is the invoices are going to come to you typically from email from the vendors, or they're going to come to you from emails from your departments or your locations, et cetera. Or you may even still get paper invoices. So what a lot of our customers have done when they centralize their accounting, they will have the emails all go into a central email inbox. And then from there, they'll have a process to save those invoices out to a folder so that we can then run them through Capture. And some of our customers, will have a process that they've worked out with their IT department that will automate saving those PDFs, if you will, out to the folder from their email. And it could be something where they're using a program called Power Automate through Microsoft 365, or they may even be looking at a third-party product for Outlook that simply does something like that for them in an automated way. And you can always in email simply drag and drop the document into this folder. That's not a problem. It just kind of depends on how you would like to do it. But at the end of the day, folks are dragging the invoices into here. Then what they'll do is they'll have a folder inside of that repository where they could say, okay, I'm going to hop into this folder and I'm going to grab these, 20 invoices or whatever the situation might be. And I'm going to drag them into my in Capture folder. And then now they know, okay, these are the invoices that I'm going to be working on. So that way, if any other person is adding invoices to this folder, I'm not going to get confused as to which ones I just did and which ones are in process and those types of things. And so then when they come into Capture, they can then import directly from that in Capture folder. And then once they're done migrating those invoices into FileBound, they'll close Capture, they'll come back in here, highlight those, and then drop those into an uploaded folder. And that's just, again, feedback from our customer base of how they're organizing the invoices locally, just to kind of keep themselves, in check, if you will. Okay. All right. So then what I'm going to do, let's go back into Capture. And when we're in our import process, a lot of times then, you'll have to change this to, all or PDF to kind of see the documents that are in that folder. So that's pretty common. We can highlight all of these invoices, if you will. Let's just do these again and open them up. So once our import is complete and our OCR is done, what's common for a lot of our customers then as well is they kind of look at this file tree over here, and they're looking for anything that has 2 or more pages inside of it. So there's certain vendors that'll send you one PDF, if you will, but maybe inside of it will have 4 or 5 different invoices. And the best way to handle that would then be to come into here just to check anything that's multiple pages to see if you need to break those apart. So let's pretend that page 6 happened to be the first page of a new invoice, and the vendor sent us, multiple invoices in the same PDF. Then what you can do is right-click on that page 6, click Insert File, and then that will break apart page 6 through 9 from the original page 1 through 5. And so it's nice, to be able to do something simple like that. I can say it like that because years ago, prior to that even being a thing, we would have to break apart those PDFs before you would even get to this point, which was, a huge hassle back in the day. So at least we kind of have that ability to electronically break those apart. So can we kind of break that apart? It'll bring that new file down to the bottom. We can kind of keep paging through, and then we might say, okay, well, let's, insert that again. And now I've got my invoices broken out, if you will. The hard part with FileBound Capture, there's not a great way to merge those back together. You can do it by kind of dragging and dropping your document, if you will, and then placing it where you need it to go. And then that'll merge it back together. But there's no real true undo button. So I do caution, when you right click and do that. You can certainly delete if you want and re-import that in. I'm just going to delete today to kind of move on to the next steps. So, but that's the idea there is, kind of breaking apart those invoices. Okay. So then the next thing is, again, that OCR perform templating. And again, that's going to grab what data it can. And then what a lot of customers will do is they'll kind of tab through, and not every invoice is going to have a template per se. So as you kind of tab through, you can identify, okay, UPS doesn't have freight, so I don't really need to spend any time looking for freight. I can kind of tab through. UPS won't have a PO number, so I can kind of keep going, and looks like I've got multiple UPS ones, right? So then maybe I want to make sure I got the right one selected. So kind of a nice way to double check yourself, if you will, in that whole process. And then some of you will have a department or location, if you will, of who you're going to route that invoice to. So then you can select that value at that point and then move on to the next invoice and check that one out, right? So you could say, okay, well, here's all of our data, all that looks looking good. And then we get down to our department location, all that's fine. So that was an easy one. We move on to the next one. It looks like all that data is filled in. And maybe what you've learned over time is that, hey, with this vendor, all the fields have been good, but we do like to double check the freight just to make sure, because sometimes they charge us two different types of freight and we've got to add it together, And so that's just something that you'll learn as you're kind of doing that to kind of save yourself time, if you will. So ultimately, our goal, I kind of mentioned it earlier, but is to extract as much data as we can so that the time that you spend truly is based on double checking the data and then filling in the blanks. Somebody had a good point to me one time was, hey, Matt, we've got 7 fields that we're expecting to be filled in capture. When I make templates, it fills in 5 or 6 of those. That's awesome. My percentage of data entry just drops drastically. And so that's a good way to look at it. We can grab whatever the invoice allows us to grab. And then, ultimately, this is the data we want pushed into the accounting system. So, all right. So now let's do this. Let's close out of here and delete this batch. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to import an invoice and kind of walk through, how to make a template, if you will. So I've got an invoice here. And, if I just to kind of give you the visual, if I do the perform templating, it's not going to match. It kind of turns red. There's nothing, listed there, right? So if I wanted to make a template, then I could right click on that invoice and say, let's convert this to a template. And when I'm thinking about creating templates, one of the things that I kind of caution is it's important to me that you know your numbers, meaning that, when you're creating a template, we don't just want to just create templates to make templates. We need to know, hey, does it make sense to even make a template for this vendor, right? And so to know that, what a lot of people will do, and I'll minimize this here, is they'll actually run a report out of their accounting system that'll give them a list of invoices that they've paid over the past 12 months. And in that list, they'll start kind of grouping and filtering things out and then running some counts. And we can help you through this process. But the idea is that you end up with a list of vendor numbers and then a count as to the number of invoices that you processed by that vendor to give you a total count of your invoices. And now that we know how many invoices we're doing per vendor, we can start setting our goals when it comes to templating. So like, for example, in this data set, 50% of our invoices are being handled by these top 10 vendors, right? And so obviously it makes sense to make a template for those. And it looks like if we add an additional 8 more templates, that gets us to 60% of our invoices would have a template in it, which is awesome, and so on and so forth. So kind of understanding those numbers, and you kind of see the gaps start getting bigger, of course, as the vendors get smaller. But really the point I'm trying to make is that, if you get an invoice in for a vendor, and you may or may not know how often you get invoices for them, but if you're making a template for invoice or for vendor that only gives you 4 invoices, may not be worth your time, because it's simply just not going to give you a very much kind of bang for your buck as far as time savings. So what we can do is, again, work with you on these numbers, kind of show you what we've done for other folks, but then kind of create a summary, right? And so we say, okay, well, how many templates does it take, to get to kind of our different template milestones, right? And so you can kind of see that really a sweet spot would be probably 85%, because that's about 107 templates. We could certainly get to 90%, but it would require another, 59, templates, if you will. And so you'd say, well, heck, for 107, I get 85%. And 85%, so what does that really mean, right? So if you just did the simple math, you could say, okay, 14,000 invoices that I processed last year are going to have a template out of my 6,500 invoices that I process, right? Meaning that only 2,400 invoices don't have a template. And if I broke it down by, over the course of 12 months, really that's only 207 invoices a month that I wouldn't have a template for. So in this case, that number is pretty attractive. Everybody's numbers are different, so we may have a customer that has much larger total invoice counts, or that maybe total invoice count is similar, but then our template count changes. Maybe they're at 200 to get to 85%, so that type of thing. So everybody's numbers are just simply different, but we can work with you to kind of figure those out. Some other kind of numbers just with this data that I grabbed is, there were 675 total vendors, if you will, and of those 675 vendors, 428 of them sent 6 or less invoices per year into FileBound to be paid, if you will, right? And so now, if you think of that, of those 428 vendors, they've only in total creating 906 invoices, and so it's not a very big number of invoices coming from all of those vendors. So it does make sense to kind of think about, all right, what's our proper percentage and what are our best numbers, so that when it comes to making a template, we're making good choices. Okay, so let me get into that template, and we say, hey, you know what? This is definitely a vendor we'd like to make a template for. We get enough of them, it makes sense. And some of those off the top of your head, and some of those you don't. And so it's good to have that list to kind of refer to. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click on this invoice label here and click on Convert Pages to Template. And what that does then is it starts a two-step wizard, if you will, on creating the template. And so our first step is identifying the keyword that's going to make this invoice or this piece of paper or this image, however you want to kind of think of it, unique for other from other vendors. And with this particular vendor, their name is unique, right? So that's easy. Sometimes you won't get that lucky. Maybe you'll find that a fax number is better, or maybe a phone number is better, or a PO box and a zip code, is better. So again, that's kind of depending vendor by vendor. And sometimes it depends on what the vendor gives you, so they may just give you a big logo, and that doesn't work very well when it comes to, templates. So, really we're looking for text and something that's unique. So in this case, I'll just choose their name, since it's incredibly unique name there. And then I'm going to hit save and close. And then that's going to take me to the step 2 in the wizard. And this is where we're going to apply our zones. And so the zones, as far as that goes, are pretty straightforward. And for invoice number, if you think of this situation, so I've got an invoice, it's going to come to me, via email from the vendor, and their invoice number is always going to be here. So it's not an invoice that's been printed, it's not been scanned, it's not been written on, et cetera. It's coming straight from the vendor. So in that case, I can use what's called a fixed zone type to kind of highlight the area that I want to read, and the data that lands in there is what's going to come into my FileBound field. If I do the same thing for invoice date, so I'll click on fixed, it'll give me another kind of yellow field. And what I did when I did the first one is I ultimately aligned my top left-hand corner to where I want that zone to live, if you will. And then I just come to the bottom right-hand corner and then diagonally shrink it so it fits my spot, and I go from there. And some of the things I try to avoid, maybe having the zone covering a line, a vertical line, or even a horizontal line, or even having it grab, two sets of data, just so it doesn't get confused there. So it is kind of a precision thing. The nice thing is, depending upon the size of your monitor and how you're doing the template, you can definitely control your zoom. You can zoom to width, zoom to height, whatever's easiest for you when you're making that template, or even zoom in further than that. So then invoice total, depending upon the type of invoice that you have, you may find that we need to use a different type of zone. But in this case, it looks like the invoice total is going to be kind of in a fixed spot at the bottom of the invoice. So in that case, I'm going to create a zone called fixed, and I'm just going to kind of bring it down to the bottom here, and I'm going to place it there. And you notice this time, I actually won't change the size of my zone because I've got a lot of open space around that value. And the nice part about that is as that dollar amount grows, I kind of leave my space to the left to make sure I'm capturing all those values. Now, freight on this invoice, could be done from this field down below, but what I want to show you, and why I like this example, is that they also include freight in the body of the invoice. And some of your vendors, that's the only place that they provide it to you. So, how do you create a zone that's fixed and, knowing that this field's going to move up and down based on how many things that you've ordered? And the answer is you simply can't. And so then that's why FileBound gives you this dynamic zone. So what you can do is in this keyword column, when you click on it, then if you click on the word freight, it then uses that as a keyword and it gives you this yellow zone. And now you can line your yellow zone to grab the value that you're after. So that's kind of something to think about. Now, the one interesting thing with the dynamic zones is the way that it works ultimately is it kind of reads left to right, top to bottom, just like you would read a book ultimately. And so what some people will do is they'll say, okay, well, if I use the body of this, then I could probably use all pages, if you will, but maybe I want to use the first value. And then that will be the first value in the body, if you will, versus if you think of what we saw before, freight's going to be down here as well. So kind of a trick to that whole process to say, okay, let's use all the pages. So if you had a 5-page invoice, it would go page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5. And as soon as it finds freight, it'll then use it. Some vendors, you may say, okay, nope, we want to use all pages, but we want to use the last value, that sort of thing. Some vendors are clean and you can just say, I want to use the last page, that type of thing. So you can kind of play with it a little bit and know by vendor what you need to do. But those are kind of two tools to handle it. And then same idea with a duplicate. So, you may choose last page, but what you might want to say is I want to use the first value in the last page or use the last value, kind of those types of things. So you can kind of customize that as needed. And similar with the invoice total, the way that this invoice was designed, it's got that kind of stub remittance, if you will. So most of the time when I see an invoice like that, it always has the total on page 1. And so in that case, that's why I did a fixed field there. But you may find that in the invoice total, it's not going to be visible until the last page. So you can definitely modify that template or those zones, if you will, to make that work for you. All right, so let's talk about invoice due date. So with the invoice due date, some vendors have a specific date and sometimes they just have terms. Like in this example, they actually have the invoice due date in 2 spots. They have one right up here and they've got a payment due date down below. So you can kind of pick and choose what you want. You can also kind of pick and choose. Maybe there's a discount date. So maybe they've got a date that says if you pay by this date, you'd get a certain discount, et cetera. So kind of up to you on that. I definitely have customers that are trending into not doing due dates in Capture at all. And then as the invoice enters FileBound, we analyze the vendor number and we just determine, do we need to do 10 days, 15 days, 5 days for our due date, or is there no need? All we just have to do is default it to 30 days. So there is some flexibility when it comes to how FileBound handles due dates versus, grabbing those values in the capture process. Okay, so looks like there is a purchase order number on here. So I'm going to click on fixed and move on and grab that field there. This is kind of tricky because purchase orders can get goofy depending upon your sales team. And so I've definitely seen folks just kind of grab that zone and make it the whole width of that zone because they might put in a number, they might put their name in, they might put something else in there. And you may just want to make sure you grab the whole thing. So you kind of make your zone to work whatever's best with you. And then as far as vendor name, if you think about it, what we're trying to do is use the same vendor name that we would have in our accounting system. So that being said, definitely not common for a vendor to have that name on their invoice, if you will. So instead of doing a dynamic or fixed, we can actually just choose value and we can simply just type in that vendor name however we want it. And then same with the vendor number. Obviously, there's not going to be a vendor number on here. So we can simply just type it in. So on and so forth. So typically that's the end of our fields, if you will, in our list. Every once in a while, I'll have a customer tell me that they've got a handful of invoices that they can actually define their department or their location or their whatever. And that's great. So if you know that this, particular, for example, plumber is only going to service this location, never going to service anything else, and you want to just default it, you certainly could. So you could just click the value again, type in your department that you want to go to or your location or whatever the situation might be for that. So in this top section here, I'm going to use a scroll bar. I'm going to scroll up and I'm going to hit save. And then I'm going to click on test setup. And I'm just looking to see, what did it grab, that sort of thing. So I grabbed my invoice number, grabbed my date, got my total, got my freight, due date, and PO, but it missed out on my vendor. And every once in a while, it'll do that. And I kind of, if you notice when I started typing, I typed a letter, I hit backspace, and sometimes that's a trigger to make it fail, if you will. So what I did is kind of do that on purpose, so I could come in here, click reset, and then type in that vendor name again. Sorry. And then again for the, oops, I did dynamic. So let me change that again. So I hit reset, I change that to value, and then type in value. And then for vendor number, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to click on reset, and I'm going to type in value, then type in that there. And so now I'm going to click save, and then I'm going to hit test setup, and now you'll see that it's filled in those fields there. So one of the things that some folks have reached out about is, every once in a while they'll have a vendor where the invoice total doesn't grab the numbers properly. And, every vendor is a little bit different in how they handle their font or how they print it. Maybe they put it on a gray box. There's a lot of different things that could cause problems with that, especially because we're asking it to grab a numeric field. And so sometimes we've gone in and found that it would add a space in between, some of the numbers for whichever reason. And so there's kind of a way to get around that. So what we're going to show you is a little bit more advanced, but because we're recording it, I wanted it on the recording. And so I think now is a good time just to kind of show you that. So we do have the ability when we create a template in Capture to click on this scripting icon, and we can actually create a small little script that will do a replace. And so it's going to replace the value that we grabbed. And we're going to say, let's replace the space. So I've got the double quotes there, if you can see, hopefully. And we're going to do another comma, and then we're going to do two quotes, two double quotes back to back with nothing in between. And that means we're going to replace space with nothing. And then we can add our close parentheses there. So again, replace open parentheses, value, comma, double quotes, space, double quotes, comma, and then two double quotes in a row. And then we'll close all that with a closing parenthesis there, and then say OK. So now you'll notice that we've got this little icon there. And now when I click save and test setup, you'll see that not only does it grab the value, but it uses the script to kind of make sure that there's no spaces. And then this is the value that will get returned to your field on the left-hand side. So I show you that today, again, to get into the video, but also to show you, if there's some invoices that have patterns of things simply not working, sometimes we can add a small little script to clean up the data that it extracted so it returns good data for you. So definitely let us know if that's something you're running into. And then once I'm done with my template, I simply just click on save and close, and then that brings me to this screen. So for the template name, what I personally like to do is use the vendor number. And I like to do that because my thought is it's unique, and if somebody tried to create a template, but we already had it, that would be a trigger to say, hey, you're going to try to make a duplicate template, that sort of thing. And then I'm going to save it. And we can also have it prompt you to synchronize that template to the server. And what that does basically is just copies that template and backs it up onto the server inside of FileBound. And that way, if your computer crashes or whatnot, we can sync it back to you. And for those of you that are maybe running multiple users, multiple workstations, or maybe even multiple locations using FileBound capture, when we do that sync, then that also gives you the ability to have those other users hit a sync button inside of the tools menu and here, and that would then download those templates to their machine. One of the tricky parts about the templates is if you do have multiple people creating templates, etc., and you've got multiple people deleting templates, we do have to actually delete those off of FileBound as well. So if you kind of get into a place where you end up doing some deleting or need to do a bunch of deleting of templates for whichever reason, let us know. We can kind of walk you through what those steps are so we can get them cleared out of the FileBound repository. And then that way, when you sync, the newest version of what you created, will get synced into FileBound. So anyways, we can also modify templates. So if I wanted to, for example, I could just simply come and click on that template and hit our pencil icon, and that brings us into this template, and we could move zones or whatever it is we need to do. And then I just follow the same steps as what I would have done above, hit save, hit the test setup, and then save and close. So, okay, and to get into there, sorry, I probably don't think I said it out loud, was the tools menu, and then the setup templates is how I got into there. Okay, so that's really the ins and outs of creating a template. So our intention is after we're done with this meeting, and once we have the video created and posted online, we'll send out a link to the video so that you can kind of watch it, if you will. But we'll also include 2 documents. One is just how to process an invoice through FileBound capture, and then another one is about how to create a template and some of those tips and tricks that I kind of walked through to you today. So probably early next week, you'll see that email come out with those documents. They'll be in Word. That way you can modify them and add any comments or notes that you might see fit into that as well. Okay, so then what I want to talk about is a little bit about what's next when it comes to the capture environment ultimately, right? So templates are great. In the example that we showed here, when we're talking about counts and how many templates somebody might need, if you did some real basic math of saying it takes you 3 minutes a template, there's 107 templates, or even if you round it up to 5 minutes, if you take 500 minutes, the gain of having a template for 14,000 out of 16,000 invoices is huge, and so saves you plenty of time, and it's something you can pick away at, right? So you could say, okay, well, let's start off with making sure we've got our 50, 60% handled, and then let's start chipping away at these until we eventually get to that 85. So that's possible, or dedicate someone's time to it, and they could probably knock it out in less than a week. So we can help you train, anything you need on that, definitely let us know. Then, the future of the capture ultimately is the next level would be the automation. And so on Monday with the PSI capture, we'll cover a lot of the same things that we covered today, just in a different product. But we'll talk about how that software can monitor a folder and sweep it to import certain invoices. So if I had some big vendors and I just had those invoices into a special folder, we could set up PSI capture to sweep those, extract the data like what we did today, and then upload those directly into FileBound. So again, we can kind of work with you on that, but that's kind of the next evolution, if you will. And then beyond that type of evolution, of course, is AI, right? So AI is the ability really to use the OCR data, like what we're grabbing, even in FileBound capture, but then analyze it in a different way so that we can automatically extract the data without you having to say, oh, invoice numbers here, invoice numbers there, et cetera. So ultimately, it's capture without templates. That's kind of the concept. So what I want to show you today is a product that we're working and kind of testing, if you will, with FileBound on, and it's just called Intelligent Capture. And it's a browser-based capture product, so wouldn't be installed on your computer at all. It would just be in the cloud. And as I log into the system, then it's going to take me right into basically my queue, if you will, or my folder of work that I need to process, which can be shared. And there's a lot of things we can do in that regard. But ultimately, to get an invoice into this folder, what we would do is we would tie that the software to your email. And so, for example, we wouldn't want to monitor, AP invoices at mycompany.com. We would monitor probably a subfolder of that, because that way we don't get the order acknowledgments and the shipping confirmations and all the other junk that you get in your inbox. So if you think about Outlook, you get an invoice in an email, you drag the email to a subfolder inside of Outlook, and then ultimately this capture monitors that email throughout the day. And as it sees an invoice come into that email folder, it'll grab it and then push it into the queue here. And then once it's in the queue, we can do a couple different things. So we can have it, on its own, extract the data as much as it can. So the way that kind of works is like, it's gonna label the invoice on its own with just kind of its own assumption of what the vendor name is. You'll enter in the true vendor name that you want it to be, so maybe you're a company that would be all capital letters. So you would make sure that the vendor name's in all caps, and then you'd enter in your vendor number. And then from there, you can see it's kind of grabbed the invoice date, number, all those things on its own, PO number, it grabbed it from down there, and invoice total. If I kind of scroll down, yeah, got our freight down there and our invoice total from down there as well. So it kind of grabbed the data on its own, no template needed, etc. And then as you kind of get comfortable using it, which wouldn't take too long based on what we're testing, then we can build in rules that says something to the degree of, okay, if an invoice comes in and it finds the vendor name, and we do a lookup and we know what the true vendor name is and the true vendor number is, and it finds an invoice number, and it finds a date and a PO, and there's something in our freight field, and we've got our invoice total, then don't have it stop in this queue, just ultimately route it into FileBound. So that way, inside of FileBound, then you would have that invoice. And some of you have different business rules inside of FileBound, so that may not be the great way to do it, but kind of wanted to point out that there's a lot of flexibility to how we handle these invoices, just like flexibility inside the FileBound product. So that's what we're testing. It's been going great so far. We've been kind of playing with it for a few months, and a lot of promising, good-looking things that are coming out of it, which is great. And so we've got some meetings in the next few weeks, and then we'll probably be able to kind of make an announcement relatively soon after that, as far as when we want to start rolling it out to customers. And kind of like a lot of our integrations that we may have worked with you on with different accounting systems we run. So we'll roll it out to just a handful of customers, make sure it's functioning the way that it is expected to, and that they're having good success and they're saving time, hopefully, is what we're going to be after, and then kind of roll it out to other folks. So there will be a cost to it, and it'd be kind of like a monthly fee, kind of like FileBound. But I think the pricing model that they've proposed is certainly affordable, based off of the fact that I think we can save a ton of time ultimately. So great. Well, I appreciate everyone hopping on today, and again, we'll put that in the recording out for you. I'm going to quick check to see if I've got any questions. Okay, so one question is, I created a template and click the test button, and that shows up correct. And then we save the template and we do a sync. Then when we run the OCR templating, the capture does not read the template. What would cause this? So two things, I guess. Let me back up here. Hop into capture real quick. So inside of capture, when we import that image in, if you remember on this one, before I created the template today, I clicked the OCR form template and it turned red. Or another way would be there's no data at all in any of the fields. So in that case, then what that means is when you're on your template, and if I kind of open this one up again, then this keyword didn't match, if you will. Another scenario that you might have also is that maybe you make a template for this particular vendor, but in the vendor name and number on the left, it's a whole different company name. And in that case, like let's just say for fun, it said Johnson and Sons. So then what that means is ultimately there's not a problem with this template. There's a problem with the Johnson and Sons template because for whichever reason it's using or matching against the unfervor template. And so, then you would say, okay, well, I don't need to modify this template. I need to go modify the Johnson and Sons. But ultimately, if you're not getting any data on the left or you're getting the wrong vendor, then the trigger that is incorrect is going to be that matching value more than anything else. Great question. All right. So I don't see any other questions. Just kind of checking both yep, they're empty. So excellent. So again, I appreciate everyone's time and, always definitely appreciate your business. And again, if you have at least maybe one person that would like to sit into the PSI capture next week, at least you would see, a different product and see if that's something of interest. And maybe you find, hey, that might save us a ton of time, but definitely what we'll do is we will reach out once we kind of finalize, the rollout of the upland capture and let you know on that, because again, I think for the customers that are doing FileBound capture, this is a good next step, if you will, because it kind of jumps over the template concepts and gets right into the AI. The nice thing is it's not machine learning, if you will, so you don't have to pay for that level of AI, but we can have it still extract the data properly. And we've had, again, really good success with it. We've probably pushed over 500 or 600 invoices through, and we're just not seeing a lot of holes with it. So we did have troubles when we were trying to grab the discount field. It just wasn't quite sure what the discount was at times, so we just dropped that. But freight's been good, invoice total's been good in that regard. So if you kind of think of it as the base level things, I think it's going to do a really good job on that, and then maybe utilize FileBound in a different way once the invoices get in there. But again, we'll work through that. Each customer is different, so we'll kind of work through that together. But all righty. Well, again, thanks everyone for joining. Appreciate your time and give you a little bit of time back and enjoy the rest of your day.